The night of July 4th, 1995 was alive with distant fireworks, the muffled booms rolling over the hills of Plymouth, New Hampshire, like a heartbeat echoing through the darkness. Townsfolk celebrated in their yards, children squealing as sparklers traced fleeting arcs in the sky, unaware of the quiet terror unfolding just beyond the edges of the lights. There, on the outskirts of the town, a solitary cabin stood half hidden in pine and shadow, its windows faintly glowing, a lone beacon of human presence in the silence. Inside, Elias Vance, 45 years old, reclined over his desk, eyes flicking over diagrams and pages filled with dense equations, a half-drained glass of scotch at his side. Elias wasn't just a physicist, he was a man obsessed. His colleagues respected him, even feared him a little, though none truly understood the depths of his work. He had been chasing a theory that flirted with the boundaries of physics and something almost beyond comprehension. A notion that, if proven, would challenge not just science but reality itself. And on this humid summer night, Elias believed he had reached a point where his work was no longer abstract, where the calculations and experiments might finally touch something tangible. Outside, the trees whispered in the wind, and somewhere, a dog barked at a distant road. Inside the cabin, the air was heavy with the scent of aged paper and wood polish, the faint metallic tang of old machinery. Elias's hands moved with practiced precision as he adjusted a small device on the floor, a curious contraption of wires, lenses, and tiny gears, unlike anything his neighbors had ever seen or could imagine. He had tested it quietly for weeks, each adjustment bringing him closer to something he dared not yet name. He didn't realize how close he was, or what it would cost him, or anyone else. He poured himself another sip of scotch, the amber liquid catching the dim lamplight, and leaned back, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Something had shifted in the device during his last trial. The air in the room seemed to thrum, a low vibration that set his teeth on edge. A fine, almost imperceptible hum began, and Elias felt it deep in his chest, as though the cabin itself had started to pulse with anticipation or warning. And then, it happened. A scream, piercing and human, split the night. It wasn't from Elias, though the sound echoed as if it belonged to him. Outside, the wind carried it through the trees, past neighbors' windows, past the sounds of fireworks. It was abrupt, horrifying, and then, silence. When authorities arrived, called by the neighbor who had heard that scream, the cabin was unnervingly quiet. The door was unlocked, the lights still on, the desk littered with papers, and the half-full glass of scotch untouched. The device on the floor was dormant, its lenses glinting faintly as if nothing had just occurred. And yet, something was undeniably wrong. A small, perfect geometric hole pierced the ceiling, almost surgical in its precision. Not a crack, not a splintered mark, but a clean circle, as if something had passed straight through the wood without disturbing the structure around it. No footprints led away from the cabin. Elias's car sat in the driveway, doors locked, keys inside. The only thing missing was his research notebook, the culmination of years of obsession, and now, apparently, a key to understanding what had happened. Investigators combed the cabin carefully, noting every detail. Nothing suggested forced entry, nothing indicated a struggle. The furniture was in place, the drawers closed, the air still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Detectives questioned neighbors, friends, anyone who might have seen or heard something. Some mentioned lights flickering inside the cabin, shadows moving oddly across the windows. Others, more skeptical, claimed they saw nothing unusual, only that terrifying scream. And then more clues began to appear, but they were subtle, almost imperceptible. A small scuff mark on the floor near the device, a smudge on a lens, a faint dust pattern disturbed on the floorboards. To any ordinary observer, these details would have meant nothing. To someone trained or obsessed like Elias, they suggested movement, purpose, precision. Something or someone had enacted an event of extraordinary complexity, leaving behind only cryptic evidence. The small hole in the ceiling became the focal point of the investigation. Forensic experts inspected it for signs of tampering or tool marks. None were found. It was as if the hole had appeared from the air itself. The device on the floor was examined but yielded no fingerprints beyond Elias's own. And then, the missing notebook, a single leather-bound volume, was noted. Everything else in the cabin remained untouched. No signs of forced removal, no footprints, no struggle. Only the scream, the hole, and the unnerving absence of the man himself. As the days passed, the town of Plymouth began to buzz with speculation. Was it an abduction? Foul play? A tragic accident? Some whispered of experiments gone wrong, of strange science, of Elias's obsession finally consuming him. Newspapers printed the story with cautious fascination. Professor vanishes in remote cabin. Mystery deepens, the headlines read. Rumors spread faster than facts. People speculated about secret government involvement, about hidden research that should never have been touched. Detectives followed every lead. They searched the surrounding woods with dogs, combed through the cabin for hidden compartments, checked nearby roads for tire tracks, questioned every person who had visited Elias in the weeks before his disappearance. Yet nothing, no shred of evidence, no hint of motive, no trace of him, surfaced. His life, his work, his very presence seemed to have evaporated from the world. Weeks turned into months, months into years. Friends and family mourned, haunted by the unanswered questions. His colleagues speculated endlessly about the theories he had been testing, some wondering if he had discovered something too dangerous to remain in one place, too powerful to stay bound by the ordinary laws of physics. The scream, the hole, the missing notebook, they became local legend, a story told in hushed tones around the town. The night when a man disappeared, leaving nothing but questions in his wake. But even as the investigation cooled, the strange mechanics of the disappearance remained. The small device, the geometric hole, the Scotch glass untouched, they suggested an order, a design, a method. Someone or something had orchestrated it with precision. It wasn't random, it wasn't chaotic. And as the years would show, that precision hinted at a truth far stranger than anyone could imagine. And so, the cabin remained, a quiet monument to mystery, its walls holding secrets that even time could not erase. Each passing year deepened the sense of unease, each retelling of the story a reminder that the world, for all its order, sometimes allows the impossible. The scream that night, sharp and human, seemed to echo endlessly, as if warning that the answers were never meant to be simple, and that those answers, when found, would change everything. The days after Elias Vance's disappearance were quiet, but beneath that quiet, a storm of speculation and fear swirled. Detectives returned to the cabin over and over, retracing every step they could imagine, studying every object as though it might suddenly speak. The small device on the floor became almost obsessive in their attention. It was a contraption unlike anything the police had encountered before. Delicate wires, tiny lenses, and carefully balanced gears. A scientific puzzle masquerading as a piece of furniture, or a machine with a purpose far beyond comprehension. No fingerprints, no signs of tampering, nothing to explain how it had been used, or if it had been used at all. The geometric hole in the ceiling continued to baffle experts. They measured it, photographed it, cut samples of the wood around it, yet no tool, no force, no conceivable human means had created it. The edges were impossibly clean, as if something had passed through the material without disturbing the surrounding wood. Some officers whispered of strange electromagnetic phenomena. Others muttered about impossible science. But no one dared suggest aloud what the townsfolk already whispered, that something in the cabin had defied the ordinary laws of reality. Neighbors were interviewed repeatedly. One recalled hearing strange mechanical humming the night before the scream, a low vibration in the air that seemed to set the hairs on the back of the neck on end. Another mentioned seeing the cabin lights flicker in a pattern that almost resembled Morse code, quick flashes and pauses that went on for minutes. No one could explain why they had noticed it or if it meant anything, but detectives recorded it meticulously. Every minute detail mattered. The missing notebook was the focal point of the search. Elias's handwriting, meticulous and precise, contained more than just equations. There were diagrams, small, intricate sketches of devices, wheels within wheels, lenses and pulleys. Some pages were covered in scribbles that resembled nothing so much as a language of symbols. Every entry felt urgent, almost frantic at times, as though Elias were both communicating and warning at the same time. The final pages, however, were missing, torn from the book or perhaps taken by Elias himself. Whoever, or whatever, had taken the notebook knew its value. Weeks passed with little progress. The police considered abduction theories, Given the scream and his sudden disappearance, they looked at co-workers, acquaintances, anyone who might have harbored grudges. Financial motives were examined, rival academic jealousy, small-town resentments, but nothing fit. Elias had lived a solitary life, yes, but one largely insulated from danger. His home showed no forced entry, no signs of struggle. Nothing had been stolen except the notebook, and even that seemed carefully chosen. Then something unexpected surfaced. A construction worker renovating a shed on the outskirts of town reported finding a small metal fragment, partially buried in the soil, almost perfectly round, resembling a tiny industrial-grade bearing. When police examined it, they found it matched the machinery on Elias's device almost exactly. It was a piece that should not have been lost, yet somehow it had traveled from the cabin to the yard, and there it rested, forgotten in dirt. It was a clue that spoke of precision and planning, and yet it answered nothing. The local media grew obsessed with the story. Every new detail, no matter how small, was reported with dramatic flair. Headlines screamed about secret experiments and strange science, and the townspeople whispered of ghostly lights, eerie hums, and screams carried by the wind. Some claimed to see shadows moving across the cabin's windows, even weeks after Elias vanished. Others swore they saw him, at a distance, moving among the trees, only for the figure to vanish when approached. The legend of the astrophysicist who disappeared under impossible circumstances was growing, and with it, the sense that something beyond ordinary understanding had occurred. Meanwhile, detectives attempted to reconstruct the night of the disappearance. They reviewed the cabin's layout, the position of the device, and the notes left behind. They hypothesized, had Elias somehow triggered a mechanism that transported him, or someone else, through some unknown means? Some officers scoffed at the idea, yet none could explain the hole, the scream, the missing notebook, or the tiny metal fragment found in the yard. Something extraordinary had occurred, and it had left no witnesses beyond the neighbors, no fingerprints, and no obvious path of escape. Months turned into years, and yet the mystery remained unsolved. The case files grew thicker, with statements, sketches, forensic reports, and endless photographs. Every inch of the cabin had been meticulously documented, every page of Elias's remaining notebooks catalogued, but the final entry remained missing. The screen, the device, the hole. They became points of obsession for those who studied them. Experts in physics, engineering, and even obscure fields of experimental science offered theories, none of which could be proven. Some suggested time might be a factor, that perhaps Elias's experiments had altered something fundamental about the flow of reality. Others thought the story had become too fanciful, a cautionary tale wrapped in tragedy. And then, a breakthrough of sorts came from the most unexpected place, a local university. Years later, a young physicist, curious about Elias's work, began examining the notes that had been recovered. He noticed patterns in the sketches, tiny alignments, symbols and placements that suggested a sequence, almost a set of instructions. It was as if Elias had left a puzzle behind, a series of deliberate hints embedded within the pages, waiting for someone patient enough to decode them. The patterns hinted at movements, spatial arrangements, and timing sequences that matched nothing known in conventional physics. The young researcher realized that if the instructions were literal and not metaphorical, they might indicate the use of the device to perform some kind of extraordinary action, one that defied normal understanding. Soon after, more anomalies were discovered at the cabin site. The soil beneath the floorboards was disturbed, subtly but deliberately. Investigators, following the sketches from the notebooks, dug carefully, revealing a small compartment. Inside lay an object wrapped in cloth, preserved as though protected from time itself. It was not Elias, as everyone had assumed, but a human form. A woman, strangely preserved, her clothing centuries old. The scream that had been heard decades earlier now took on a new meaning. Perhaps it had not been Elias at all, but her. Suddenly displaced, screaming in terror as she was ripped from her time, from her world, and placed into his. At this point, the narrative shifted. Elias was no longer just a missing man. He was part of the phenomenon, the act, the mechanism itself. He was both observer and participant, a man who had crossed boundaries few could even conceive of, and who had left behind cryptic clues, a device, and a small hole that held the secret of what had occurred that night. The police and investigators, decades into the cold case, realized that they were dealing not with ordinary crime, but with something that blurred the line between science and something far stranger, something that challenged the very understanding of cause and effect. And so, the case, cold and mysterious for years, began to pulse with new life. With every clue, every recovered page of the notebook, every tiny fragment of metal, the truth began to take shape. Not a crime in the conventional sense, but an act orchestrated with precision, with purpose, and with consequences that none could have anticipated. Elias's disappearance was not merely an event, it was an engineered act, a step in a sequence whose end was hidden, a secret that would not be revealed until decades later, when time itself seemed ready to yield its secret. The people of Plymouth, once casual onlookers, found themselves caught in a story that stretched across years, across understanding, across reality itself. And in that quiet, isolated cabin, long after fireworks faded and summer nights gave way to autumn winds, the echoes of that scream lingered. A reminder that some mysteries do not fade, some disappearances are more than they seem, and some acts once committed will reverberate through time. Years after Elias Vance vanished, the cabin remained untouched, a quiet monument to impossibility. Its walls filled with echoes of that scream, and the faint hum of his devices that no one could fully explain. Investigators returned sporadically, driven more by obsession than expectation. They pored over the remaining fragments of his notebooks, studying diagrams, symbols, and coded sequences that at first seemed like meaningless scribbles, but gradually began to suggest a pattern, a method, a plan. It was a young physicist named Marlowe Whitman, drawn to the mystery, who noticed the first hint of logic in the chaos. He was meticulous, patient, obsessed with precision, much like Elias had been. Working late nights in a dimly lit lab, Marlowe compared pages, line after line, noticing alignments between sketches of the device and the small geometric hole in the ceiling. He realized something profound. The device wasn't merely experimental. It was operational. The hole in the ceiling was a gateway, a precise point of entry, and the scream that had haunted the town, was the result of its activation. Someone, or something, had moved through it that night. Marlowe shared his theory with the police, who had never stopped cataloging evidence, now decades cold. They were skeptical, of course. Time had made them wary of anything beyond the ordinary. But the corroborating fragments, the small metal bearing, the preserved remains of the centuries-old woman buried beneath the cabin floor, made disbelief increasingly difficult. What they had witnessed that night was not merely a disappearance. It was an engineered extraction, a transaction, a temporal exchange. It began to make a grim kind of sense. Elias Vance had not been taken against his will. He had orchestrated something extraordinary, but it had gone beyond his control. Or perhaps he had intended it all along. On that humid July night, he had prepared, activated the device, and initiated a process that displaced another human being from their own time, and in doing so, replaced himself in a space and moment where no ordinary human could follow. The scream belonged to her. The woman ripped from centuries past, screaming as the laws of physics and time bent violently around her. The cabin's devices, the hum, the hole, the scotch left untouched, were all artifacts of this orchestration. The scotch, left deliberately, suggested he had intended to maintain appearances for anyone entering the cabin. The half-drained glass was more than casual. It was a marker, a human touch, grounding the extraordinary in mundane reality. The hole was not random. It was mechanical, precise, a signature of the operation itself. And the missing notebook was no theft. It was an instrument, a map, a set of instructions that guided the act, removed to ensure that only those with the knowledge or obsession to decode it could understand the event. For decades, investigators had searched for fingerprints, for evidence of abduction, for anything human in scale to explain the act. They found nothing. They were looking for a conventional crime in an unconventional scene. And this was the brilliance and terror of Elias Vance's work. He had left nothing unplanned, nothing traceable by ordinary means. Every action, every object, every minute detail had been meticulously considered. As the notebook's patterns were decoded, a chilling clarity emerged. Each symbol, each alignment, corresponded to a precise sequence of mechanical and temporal events. The small metal bearing found in the yard was not an accident. It was a key component of the device, designed to complete a circuit that would manipulate the flow of time or dimensional presence. When the device was activated, the room itself became a focal point of exchange. One human displaced, another placed in their stead, the scream an audible testament to the trauma of being ripped from the known world. Marlowe, working alongside a small team of physicists and law enforcement, reconstructed the steps meticulously. He traced the sequence, the positioning of the device, the alignment of its components with the geometric hole, the timing of the activation, all leading to a single, terrifying moment of transformation. In that instant, Elias had initiated a process that, according to the sketches, could not be observed by conventional eyes. It was hidden, instantaneous, and irreversible in ordinary perception. The cabin itself became part of the investigation, a silent witness. Every plank, every beam, every inch of floorboards was scrutinized. Small scratches suggested handling, minor shifts in the wood hinted at pressure points. Dust and soil were analyzed for anomalies. All signs indicated careful, deliberate human action, but action that defied normal laws. What the team began to realize, with a mix of fear and fascination, was that the disappearance was not merely a crime in the traditional sense. It was an act of precision engineering that resulted in an effective exchange, with the victim and the orchestrator occupying spaces not meant for them. The preserved woman, uncovered beneath the cabin decades later, confirmed the horrifying truth. She was a historical artifact, displaced from her own era, perfectly preserved in a shallow grave that matched the diagrams Elias had sketched. Her clothing, a relic of centuries past, aligned perfectly with the symbols in the notebook. There was no sign of trauma beyond the evident shock of temporal dislocation. The scream everyone had heard, was now unmistakable. She had been the one to endure the terror, and Elias's absence was the silent proof of his part in the operation. The investigation now shifted from searching for a conventional perpetrator to understanding the method, the mechanism, and the purpose. The small device was rebuilt, following the precise instructions scattered across the pages of the notebook. Each alignment, each lens, each tiny gear had to be positioned exactly as described. When completed, it became clear how the act had been executed. It was not violence in the traditional sense. It was not abduction. It was a calculated scientific act that involved timing, physics, and perhaps something beyond known human comprehension. And yet, the human element remained. Elias Vance had been part of it. He had initiated the process himself. That scream had marked another life, yes, but it had been his own decision to proceed. Friends, colleagues, family, all struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the acts revealed decades later. Was it obsession? Was it brilliance? Or something else entirely? The answer was inconclusive, buried in the intersection of science and terror. Years of speculation gave way to tentative conclusions. Law enforcement closed the case officially as extraordinary unexplained disappearance, noting that while the mechanics suggested human initiation, there was no crime in the conventional sense, no evidence of malice, no witnesses of attack, and no conventional motive. Yet for the townspeople, for those who had heard the scream, the hole, or observed the flickering lights, the story was very real. A man had vanished, a woman displaced, and the laws of reality had bent in a quiet, unobserved corner of Plymouth, New Hampshire. For those who pieced together the notebook decades later, the truth became almost cinematic in its horror. A calculated, deliberate orchestration that replaced one life with another, leaving only silence, a half-drained glass, and a precise geometric hole as evidence. Elias Vance was not simply missing. He had engineered the extraordinary. He had crossed a boundary few humans had even imagined, leaving behind a puzzle of metal, wood, equations, and human terror. And so, the cabin remained, untouched, silent, its walls holding the secret of that night. The scream lingered in memory, the metallic fragment rested under layers of dirt, and the notebook sat in careful custody, a key to a mystery that no conventional investigation could ever fully explain. Plymouth slept, unaware that reality itself had been bent in their midst, that one man's obsession had rewritten the rules of presence and absence, leaving a story that would echo for decades to come. The lab smelled faintly of ozone and aged paper, a combination that made Marlowe Whitman feel alive and unsettled all at once. He leaned over the table, spreading out the recovered pages of Elias's notebook, each diagram and symbol meticulously aligned. Detective Harper, the man who had been on the case from the beginning, stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "You're saying, what exactly?" Harper asked, voice low. "That this device actually moved someone through time?" Marlowe didn't answer immediately. He traced a line with his finger, following the pattern of gears, lenses, and tiny nodes. "Not maybe," he said finally. "It's not theory anymore. Look at this. The alignment here, the hole in the ceiling, the metal bearing, they're all part of a sequence. A human could have triggered it. And the result? One person leaves, one person arrives. That scream, detective, it wasn't Elias's." Harper's eyes flickered toward the wall where photographs of the cabin were pinned, each meticulously labeled. "So, the scream we heard that night, she was the one screaming?" "Yes," Marlowe said, almost whispering. "The woman beneath the floorboards, she wasn't of our time. Her clothing, the preservation, this wasn't just some macabre coincidence, it's the act itself, frozen in place." Harper exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "And Elias, he just disappeared voluntarily? Or what? You're telling me he did this himself?" Marlowe traced a symbol with his fingertip, his voice trembling slightly. "Yes, if you follow the sequence, it's clear. He initiated it. That scotch glass, the positioning of the device, the lights, everything was deliberate. He set it up so no one would suspect ordinary foul play. And it worked. He left and she arrived, at least temporarily, in his world." Harper shook his head. "This is insane. There's no record, no precedent. We're talking about moving people through reality itself. And all this time we've been calling it a disappearance." "Exactly," Marlowe said. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Which is why the notebook is critical. The final entry, if we can find it, it will explain everything. Or as much as he was willing to leave behind. The first pages are equations and sketches, but the last is a message, written for anyone patient enough to follow the patterns." They returned to the cabin, a sense of reverence settling over them. It had been decades, but the air was unchanged, faintly musty, lined with dust, with the hum of the forest pressing in through the windows. Harper crouched near the floorboards, flashlight in hand. "Think it's still down there?" he asked. "I hope so," Marlowe replied. "It's the key. And if it's true, if he meant it to be found, it will explain why this all happened." Hours passed, and the two of them worked in silence, moving carefully, lifting planks, brushing away decades of dust and debris. Then Harper's flashlight caught something. A faint leather edge, hidden in a small cavity beneath the boards. "Here," he whispered, voice tight with anticipation. "Found it." Marlowe's hands trembled as he pulled the notebook free. He opened it carefully, skimming the final pages. The writing was hurried, almost frantic, and yet precise. Symbols lined the margins, interwoven with words that chilled him to the bone. "It's not a discovery, it's a threat. I've found a way to bridge the veil, but they found a way to retrieve their own. The scream wasn't mine, it was hers, the one I brought back. I'm going back to fix it, to put the piece where it belongs. I need to be the missing component." Marlowe swallowed, unable to speak. Harper's hand hovered over the notebook, almost afraid to touch it. So, he knew exactly what he was doing. Harper said slowly, He replaced himself." "Yes," Marlowe said. "He orchestrated the exchange. That woman was never meant to be here. She was displaced from her time, from her reality. And Elias, he stepped into the position she left behind. The scream was her reaction, not his. And the hole was the mechanism." Harper ran a hand through his hair. "Jesus, and for 25 years, everyone thought he was a victim. He wasn't a victim. He was the architect of this entire event." Marlowe nodded. "Exactly. A normal man living among us who decided that the laws of physics were a canvas. And the town, the investigators, everyone was staring at the wrong angle the entire time." The room fell silent. Outside, the wind rustled the pine needles, faint reminders of the world continuing without comprehension of what had occurred within these walls. Then Harper spoke, quieter this time. "And the woman, she's the proof, right? The evidence?" "Yes," Marlowe replied. "Her presence beneath the floorboards confirms the sequence. She wasn't harmed in a conventional sense. She was displaced, preserved. She's the anomaly that proves the event, the mechanism, everything he wrote about. And the notebook, it's the instruction manual, the map, and the confession all at once." Hopper shook his head slowly, almost in disbelief. And the town will tell them it's solved. Marlowe hesitated. We'll tell them a version of it. But some things people can't understand. The courtroom part, the legalities, the closure, that's trivial compared to this. Elias didn't commit a crime in the way the law can define it, but he did something extraordinary, terrifying. That's what matters. Days later, authorities issued a brief statement. The case was closed. The disappearance of Elias Vance has been resolved. No foul play was involved. The details remain confidential to protect the involved parties. Media coverage was brief and cautious. Few reported on the strange circumstances, the screams, or the device. The townspeople, curious but constrained by the sparse official statement, whispered among themselves, some thinking it a scandal, others a miracle. But for those who had been there, who had handled the notebook, who had seen the device and the preserved woman, the story was far from simple. The scream, the geometric hole, the missing notebook, the device, they were all proof of something that defied ordinary understanding. They were proof of the act itself, the engineered disappearance, and the extraordinary precision with which one man had orchestrated it. Marlowe and Hopper returned to the cabin one last time before the renovations began, standing silently as they looked around. "You think he ever regretted it?" Hopper asked softly. Marlowe shook his head. "No. If he did, it wouldn't be in a way we could understand. He was always chasing the impossible, and that night, he achieved it." Hopper exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the empty space. "Then it's done. For us at least. The scream is gone, the device is quiet, and he's gone, like he meant to be." Marlowe closed the notebook gently, placing it back in its protective case, exactly like he meant to be. And as they walked away, leaving the cabin to its silence and shadows, the wind whispered through the trees once more. The past, the present, and perhaps some impossible future seemed to hang in delicate balance, held in place by a man who had, for a single night, rewritten the rules of existence itself. The cabin had been quiet for decades, yet when Marlowe and Detective Hopper returned, it felt alive with memory. Every floorboard, every beam, every shadow seemed to hum with the echoes of that night, July 4th, 1995. The device remained on the floor, dismantled and carefully preserved under glass, but even in its stillness it carried an almost palpable weight. It was a reminder of what had occurred here, of the deliberate orchestration that had replaced one life with another, leaving the ordinary world none the wiser. Marlowe crouched, brushing dust from a small metal fragment embedded near the edge of the floorboards. "This," he said, voice low, almost reverent, "is the key component. Without it, the sequence can't be completed. That tiny piece, it was both the trigger and the stabilizer." Hopper leaned over, peering at it, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You're saying Elias really engineered everything," Hopper said, "down to the last piece of metal?" "Yes," Marlowe replied. "He didn't just theorize, he built it, he tested it. And that scream we've been haunted by all these years, it was the result of that device in action." For a moment, they simply stood there, listening to the soft rustling of pine outside. Then Marlowe opened the notebook again, this time focusing on the sketches Elias had drawn decades earlier, geometric patterns, mechanical alignments, and pages scrawled with warnings. "Detective," Marlowe said, pointing at the final entry, "look at this line. He writes about the piece where it belongs. He's talking about a human life. The scream wasn't his, it was hers. He replaced her, and in doing so he took her place in the sequence. That's why he vanished." Hopper's eyes widened. "So, the woman beneath the floorboards, she was real. She was displaced from her time? And Elias swapped with her?" "Yes," Marlowe said. "Every detail points to that. The geometric hole, the device, the meticulous alignment of every component. It wasn't a crime in the traditional sense. It was a calculated action, a temporal exchange. He wasn't taken. He chose to do this." Hopper ran a hand through his hair. "And the scream, was it recorded anywhere? Did anyone else hear it besides the neighbors?" "No recordings," Marlowe admitted. "But witness reports are consistent. They describe a single, chilling scream followed by silence. And the neighbors who came near the cabin afterward described odd sensations, vibrations, flickering lights, strange hums, all consistent with a device of this magnitude activating." As they spoke, a realization began to settle over them both. The act had been deliberate, calculated, and terrifyingly precise. And yet, There was no malice, no conventional victim in the eyes of the law. Elias had committed an extraordinary act, one that defied every rule of crime, every expectation of motive. Hopper shook his head slowly. So the case ends like this? No killer to catch, no courtroom drama? Just a man who replaced himself. Exactly, Marlowe said. We'll close the case officially, yes, but the truth is far stranger than anything the courtroom could handle. Elias engineered a disappearance that no one could have imagined, left behind only cryptic instructions and artifacts to prove it. That's the story. They returned to the shallow grave where the centuries-old woman had been preserved. Carefully, they examined her clothing and the placement of her body. Every detail matched Elias's sketches. The preservation suggested a mechanism of stasis, a way to hold her in a fixed state until she could be returned, or until the mystery could be understood. Hopper whispered, almost to himself, "It's like she was frozen in time. He didn't harm her, did he?" Marlowe shook his head. No physical harm, just displacement, terror. Imagine waking up in a world centuries after your own, realizing your life has been stolen, your reality erased for a moment, replaced by another's. That was her experience, and yet she survived, perfectly preserved, proof of the act itself. Back in the lab, Marlowe reconstructed the device piece by piece, following the instructions laid out in the notebook. Hopper watched over his shoulder, noting every alignment, every subtle adjustment. The room was tense, filled with the quiet weight of anticipation. "Can we test it?" Hopper asked, almost hesitantly. Marlowe shook his head. "No, we can't, not safely, and even if we could, we shouldn't. The mechanism is too precise, the consequences unpredictable. We only study it now, understand it, and document it. The act itself, it's done." For weeks they pieced together every detail, reconstructing the timeline, the device, and the sequence. They revisited neighbor statements, photographs, and the scattered fragments of Elias's research. Each discovery confirmed the same chilling truth. Elias Vance had vanished deliberately, leaving behind only evidence of his extraordinary orchestration. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Hopper spoke quietly. "Do you think he's okay, wherever he is?" Marlowe considered for a long moment. "I don't know. But I do know this. He succeeded. He completed what he intended. The scream was heard, the exchange happened, and the world continued oblivious. In a way, that was his reward, and his curse." As the last of the artifacts were catalogued and stored, the cabin finally prepared for renovation, the investigators took a final walk through the shadowed rooms. The walls seemed to hold the weight of decades, the hum of machinery long gone, the echo of a scream carried through time. Hopper paused near the geometric hole in the ceiling, shining a flashlight upward. "Never thought I'd see something like this," he muttered. Marlowe nodded, almost reverently. "Neither did I. A human bending reality, leaving behind nothing but a puzzle. That's all that remains for the rest of us, the story, the evidence, the echoes." And so, the cabin fell silent. The town of Plymouth returned to normal, unaware that within those walls a man had altered the course of lives, displaced a woman from centuries past, and vanished with precision that no ordinary human could comprehend. The scream faded into memory, the device rested under glass, and the notebook, now fully recovered, held the instructions, the confessions, and the proof of what had occurred. The case was closed officially, brief in the media, almost mundane. But for those who understood the truth, the story would linger forever. A tale of obsession, genius, and terror, of a man who disappeared not because he was taken, but because he chose to vanish, leaving behind only fragments of evidence, a preserved life, and a secret that challenged everything humans thought they knew about time, reality, and consequence. Marlowe and Hopper left the cabin one final time. The wind whispered through the pine trees, the shadows stretched across the floorboards, and the past and present seemed to hang in fragile balance. In the distance, faint fireworks echoed, a reminder of the night that started it all, and of a scream that had changed the course of human understanding forever. They walked away in silence, carrying with them the weight of decades, the knowledge of an extraordinary act, and the certainty that some stories are too strange, too precise, and too terrifying to be forgotten. Years had passed since the cabin had been restored, since the devices were locked away, and the final pages of Elias Vance's notebook had been carefully archived. Yet for Marlowe Whitman and Detective Hopper, the story never truly ended. It lingered, like a shadow cast long after the light had gone, an imprint on their minds that refused to fade. The echo of that scream, the hum of a device never to be activated again, and the memory of the centuries-old woman beneath the floorboards haunted them in quiet moments. One evening, as twilight settled over Plymouth, Hopper leaned back in his chair at the precinct, hands clasped over his forehead. "You know," he said quietly, "I still can't get past it. The way he did it, the precision. He didn't just vanish, he orchestrated it. He replaced himself. And everyone, the world, thought it was a disappearance. We've been chasing ghosts for decades." Marlowe, seated across from him, nodded, eyes distant. "It's not Ghost Detective. It's reality bent by a man who refused to accept the ordinary. Elias wasn't just brilliant. He was relentless, obsessed, and maybe a little terrifying." Hopper chuckled darkly. "Terrifying is one word for it. I mean, imagine what it would be like to wake up in another time, another world, and not understand what happened. That woman, she endured it all. And he just disappeared." "Yes," Marlowe replied, "but he left proof. Not just the notebook, the metal bearing, or the diagrams, but the consequences themselves. The evidence is there, even if it defies logic. And maybe that's the lesson. The truth doesn't have to fit our understanding to be real." The town of Plymouth, for its part, moved on. Newspapers ran brief summaries when the case was officially closed. They spoke of a disappearance resolved, a man found to have vanished by choice, a peculiar, almost unbelievable story summarized in polite, cautious sentences. Few ventured into speculation. Fewer still tried to comprehend the scope of what had occurred. But in quiet corners, whispers persisted, tales of strange lights flickering in the forest, of sounds that didn't belong, and of a scream carried on the wind that no one could fully explain. Marlowe often returned to the cabin alone, long after the official investigation ended. Standing inside, he would trace the outlines of the floorboards, the ceiling, the precise position where the device had sat. He would imagine the sequence unfolding in real time, the hum, the flash, the displacement. He would close his eyes and see the terrified face of the centuries-old woman. And then, a fraction of a second later, the calm, calculated figure of Elias stepping into the gap, vanishing from his own time. Once, as he traced the faint scratches in the floor near the geometric hole, a voice echoed softly in his mind, almost as if the cabin itself were speaking. "I did what had to be done. The sequence is complete. The balance is restored." Marlowe didn't speak aloud. There was no one there. Only the wind and the weight of history folded into a single, impossible act. For Hopper, the memory of that night remained a quieter, heavier shadow. He would sometimes revisit the archived notebook, running his fingers over the faded ink, trying to imagine the thought process that led a man to design such a precise act. And though the courtroom had never been required, and the legal system never touched the extraordinary nature of what had occurred, Hopper understood that justice had, in its own strange way, been served. Not through punishment, but through the unalterable proof left behind, the evidence of genius, obsession, and the terrifying beauty of an act that no one could have anticipated. "Do you ever wonder," Hopper asked one late evening, looking out at the darkened forest, "what Elias would think if he saw us now? If he saw the world trying to piece it together?" Marlowe smiled faintly, though there was a chill beneath it. "He'd probably be amused, I think, maybe even satisfied. After all, we found it, we understood it. The world may never fully accept it, but we did, and that's all that matters, at least for us." Outside, the wind stirred the pines, carrying faint whispers through the branches. For the townspeople, it was nothing more than the night air, a common sound. For those who had seen, touched, and understood the remnants of Elias Vance's act, it was a reminder. Some events are bigger than comprehension. Some disappearances are not simply missing persons cases, but deliberate orchestrated acts that bend the rules of reality itself. The woman beneath the cabin floor remained in secure preservation, her presence a silent testimony to the night that had rewritten what was possible. The notebook, catalogued and carefully stored, remained a guide to the extraordinary sequence that had replaced one human with another, and yet, like all great mysteries, it offered more questions than answers. Marlowe often reflected on the duality of Elias's choice. A man of genius, yes, but also a man who carried the weight of responsibility. One decision, precise and calculated, changed the course of multiple lives, shifted the perception of time and left the world none the wiser. And yet, it was not a crime in the conventional sense. There was no malice, no greed, no anger, only intent, only precision, only the quiet, almost terrifying realization that one man could, if he so chose, alter the world in ways no one could understand. Detective Hopper, now retired, sometimes drove past the cabin at dusk. The lights inside were dim, the structure quiet. He would remember the hum, the flash, the scream, and he would allow himself a moment of awe. Extraordinary, he would murmur to himself, and terrifying. That's what it was. Marlowe, still consumed with the physics, the sequence, and the implications, continued his research in private. He never activated the device. He never disturbed the preserved woman. And yet, every so often, late at night, he would find himself returning to the diagrams, tracing the lines, imagining the sequence, and hearing the echo of that scream carried through time. In the end, the legacy of Elias Vance was not found in headlines, courtrooms, or awards. It was found in the echoes of his actions, the preserved proof, and the quiet understanding that one life could orchestrate an event that defied all human expectation. The screen, the device, the notebook, the geometric hole. They were reminders that some mysteries are beyond resolution, some acts beyond judgment, and some disappearances are orchestrated with a precision that defies comprehension. And so, the story rests. Plymouth returns to its ordinary rhythms. Fireworks still light the skies each summer, and the wind whispers through the trees. But those who understand know the truth. That night, Elias Vance changed everything. Not violently, not maliciously, but irrevocably. And the world will carry the weight of that extraordinary act forever, in silence, in awe, and in the echo of a scream that still reverberates, faint and haunting, through time.